Looking for clarity, but getting ambiguity. When will we know if lockdown restrictions will be lifted in full? With only 3 weeks before life is due to return to normal and millions eager to plan a summer break with their families, the Prime Minister was less than forthcoming.
I can see nothing in the data at the moment that means we can't go ahead with step 4 or the opening on June the 21st, but we've got to be so cautious.
We'll also have the latest on which countries, if any, will be put on the safe list of destinations not requiring us to quarantine. Also in News at 10 tonight. A half-hearted approach risks failing hundreds of thousands of pupils. A top government education advisor quits over funding. An end to 12 years in charge? Could Netanyahu be on his way out in Israel as a wide-ranging coalition does a deal to replace him? Cultural appropriation or the sincerest form of flattery? Why Mexico's government is angry at high street fashion brands. And do judge a book by its cover? How TikTok book reviews are changing the literary landscape.
One of my kids forwarded me a TikTok video and said, "You seem to be popular on TikTok." And I was quite surprised. A month later, I was back on the New York Times bestseller list.
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omaar.
Good evening. Millions of people in England are hanging on the every word of the Prime Minister to try to get a steer on whether restrictions will be lifted in full in less than 3 weeks' time. The word he used to describe the latest data was ambiguous. But there was something a little ambiguous about what Mr. Johnson himself said. He was definitely keen to spell out that he could see nothing at the moment that would affect opening up on the 21st, but a hint of caution remained. Official infection rates are rising, he said, so though are vaccinations. 3/4 of over 18s have had at least one. Very nearly half have had both. As for deciding when we can return to normal life, we just have to give it a little longer, the Prime Minister said.
Attendance was capped at 25% at the Riverside Stadium tonight, but if restrictions are lifted in England on June the 21st, Wembley could be full for England's final group match in the Euros.
We know we've got a social distance, but it's great. The fans make the game.
It's massively important, just the atmosphere. I mean, it's a great help to the team, isn't it?
It has to be emotional, really, because it's like probably the most normal thing I've done in 18 months.
There are some difficult numbers to figure out first.
Who likes maths?
For now, the question is, are we still on track?
Last week you said you could see nothing in the data to indicate that the next stage of opening up could not happen on June the 21st. Is that still the case?
I can see nothing in the data at the moment that means we can't go ahead with step 4 or the opening on June the 21st, but we've got to be so cautious because there's no question the ONS data of infection rates is showing an increase.
In the last 24 hours, 4,000 new cases were reported. That's up almost 35% on the previous 7 days. Hospital admissions are also rising, up 123, the week-on-week increase there, 17%. And 12 coronavirus deaths were reported today, although the week-on-week numbers are down nearly 15%. What's still unclear is to what extent the vaccines are preventing coronavirus patients from needing hospital treatment.
Data at the moment is ambiguous, yes, for sure. So case numbers are going up. Hospitalizations not going up so fast, but going up slowly, and we just need to see if they pitch up really acutely over the next 2 weeks. My suspicion is that they won't.
Nearly half of UK adults have had 2 vaccinations, 3/4 have now had a single jab, and businesses can't wait to cater to them.
There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes with a view that as and when we're given the green light, we'll be able to adapt and adjust easily.
Does it make it difficult and inject a bit of uncertainty into life to have to wait until the 14th to find out what's happening?
It does, unfortunately, and it's been a few occasions where we had to do last-minute changes, but if it is for what it is, then it's worth the sacrifice and the patience.
The government expects to have enough data over the next couple of weeks for the Prime Minister to present his decision on June the 14th. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Westminster.
And Emily, our health editor, is here. Emily, we heard in Carl's report Sir John Bull sounding fairly optimistic. Do you think that's a view shared more widely?
Well, I think everybody is trying to be optimistic at the moment. And the reason I think that is because the data so far on the vaccines has actually been pretty good. We know that 2 doses of the vaccine offers good protection against the variant that was first detected in India. And yes, hospitalisations are going up, but they are still really, really low. What Sir John Bell and other scientists are waiting for, and what Matt Hancock made really clear in a speech earlier today that I went to, is this real-world data on this rise in cases that we're seeing and whether they will translate in the next week or 2 into hospitalisations, or whether the vaccine is really doing the legwork and stopping that link, sort of breaking that link between cases and hospitalisations. And that is the data we simply don't have yet. And it will take a couple of weeks for them to have it, which takes us right up until the 21st of June. So the government has committed now to vaccinate, or at least offer 2 doses to everyone over 50 by that date. They are on track to do that, and it will help their decision making, but there will be people thinking it's all getting a bit close, so it might be necessary to push it back a couple of weeks.
And hence why they're watching it day by day.
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you very much, Emily. Well, before we find out whether the final stage of opening up in England will go ahead on the 21st, holidaymakers will be told, perhaps as soon as tomorrow, whether there are to be any more quarantine-free destinations. And Robert joins us now from a studio in West London, where he is recording tonight's edition of his Peston programme. Robert, lovely to have you. What, if any, changes are you expecting to see on the green list?
So, look, I'm certainly not expecting any very significant additions to the green list. I mean, I guess there are sort of 2 countries where the government has been facing real pressure to, in a sense, unlock and allow British people to go. One is America. Business is desperate to have easier travel to America. That's not going to be announced. I think within Europe, British holidaymakers would love to be able to go to Spain. That is also not going to happen. There may be additions to the green list of some sort of smallish islands around the world, possibly some smallish bits of the EU. But as I say, nothing terribly significant. I also want to pick up on something that Emily was talking about, which is the prospects for unlocking on June the 21st. I just had Nadeem Zahawi on my programme. You can watch it at 11 o'clock tonight when the programme goes out. And, I put to him that actually a very important date is June the 7th, not June the 14th or June the 21st, because it takes a couple of weeks for the double dose to kick in terms of vaccine efficacy. And I put to him that actually when it comes to, adults and vulnerable people, we're still going to be away from vaccinating enough of them by June the 7th. He didn't dissent from that, and I came away from my interview with the Vaccines Minister thinking, actually, we're not going to unlock fully on June the 21st, that it is almost certainly going to be delayed a bit.
OK, well, we'll look out for that when your programme goes out at 11. Thank you, Robert. And there is more on all of this on the dedicated travel section of our website. That's at itv.com/holidaynews. Now, one of the problems with appointing experts like an Education Recovery Commissioner is that it's not a good look if you don't then follow their advice. Kevin Collins is said to have called for £15 billion of funding to help school children in England catch up after the disruption of the pandemic. Today, as the government announced less than a tenth of that, Kevin handed in his notice after 4 months in the job. He said the government's half-hearted approach risks failing hundreds of thousands of pupils.
It may be half-term, but it's hardly the first week spent away from school. After months of disruption, the children at this holiday club worry about what else they're aiming for. Everything they do is defined by COVID, and online learning has set them back.
It was all of the whole class in one call, and I didn't feel like I could say stuff in front of all of them. I felt really nervous.
Were you worried that you were falling behind a little bit?
Yeah, I was really worried because every time I got a question wrong, I would feel like really bad and stuff.
My older sister was busy on the computer and my brother was trying to do his work, and there was not enough room in the house for all of us to do our work.
Today, the government promised to make up for all that by investing an extra £1.4 billion in education in England, including 15-hour tutoring courses to help disadvantaged children catch up. But the money works out at just £50 per pupil per year.
Schools will always be grateful for any money they get, and schools can be incredibly creative with how they use that money. But I feel it's very short. I feel it's about headline grabbing rather than supporting young people, and I feel very disappointed by the announcement.
Today's announcement backs away from other measures like reducing the holidays, though I understand the school day is likely to be extended, possibly from as early as September next year. The biggest row today, though, is over the money. It is just a fraction of what the Education Department had argued for.
That creates great opportunities for deep learning.
Tonight, it all led the government's own advisor on catch-up learning to resign as one of those who wanted more. Sir Kevin Collins said a half-hearted approach risks failing hundreds of thousands of pupils. It is too narrow, too small, and will be delivered too slowly.
The fact that the government has been prepared to commit to only a tiny fraction of what he's proposed, I think shows that children are last in the queue for this government, and it's really disappointing.
It all leaves the Education Secretary trying to make his sums add up.
We've seen over the last few months £1.7 billion of extra funding to help children catch up already announced. On top of that £1.7 billion, there's this additional £1.4 billion.
But you did ask for 10 times more than that, didn't you? The
which is
quite ask for 10 times more?
Which is quite unprecedented outside of a spending review.
There was a hint today that more money for pupils is in play, perhaps later in the year. But for many, today's figure does feel way off target. Paul Brandt, News at 10.
That great survivor, perhaps the great survivor of Israeli politics, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, finally looks to have been pushed out of office tonight after 12 years. Unable to form a new government himself, it fell to the leader of the second largest party from the center of Israeli politics to create what can only be described as an unlikely coalition. Yair Lapid succeeded by doing a deal with an Israeli nationalist, Naftali Bennett. The two will take it in turns to be Prime Minister, providing they pass a parliamentary vote before the government is sworn in.
Today, Israel said hello to a new president and goodbye for now to a long-standing prime minister. After a total of 15 years in office, Benjamin Netanyahu is heading into opposition. And ironically, this has happened the day after this country lifted almost all coronavirus restrictions, thanks to one of the world's best vaccine rollouts, overseen by Mr. Netanyahu. His problem is that 4 elections inside the last 2 years have made clear he evenly divides Israel. The government set to replace his will have the smallest possible majority in the Knesset, just 1. And that government will have the widest possible range of ideologies, spanning the entire spectrum from left to right, the only sweet spot being their shared desire to topple Mr. Netanyahu.
I think it's absurd, and it just comes to show the critical situation that's happening here.
But this man said he supported the unity government and wished them all the best. Part of Mr. Netanyahu's undoing has been his ongoing trial on corruption charges, which he denies. His bromance with Donald Trump and the victories he secured back then have been undermined by the fact he's allegedly a crook. His replacement as Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, is a religiously observant right-winger who has touted his government as one of change, when in truth it will be anything but. The ideological gulf inside the new coalition means it will have to avoid the really big divisive issues like the Palestinians and focus on the economy instead. Even then, the government may soon collapse under the weight of its inherent contradictions. If he can stay out of jail, Mr. Netanyahu may yet get another chance. John Irvine, News at 10, Tel Aviv.
When bricks and mortar high street businesses struggle to survive the pandemic, one reason they give is the competition from online companies. Unfair competition in the eyes of some because of the low tax rates some of the big ones pay. On Friday, finance ministers from the big 7 economic nations meeting in London might finally do something about it. Research for ITV News has estimated that 8 big names, including, Amazon, Facebook and Google, legally avoid between them £1.5 billion in UK corporation tax. That's enough for 40,000 more NHS nurses.
They are 8 of the most successful companies in the world, and they all operate in the UK. According to the think tank TaxWatch, these tech giants collectively avoided paying an estimated £1.5 billion in tax on their profits here in 2019. These days, Amazon outsells both Marks & Spencer and Morrison's. Google and Facebook attract more advertising money than ITV. But despite their vast sales, their corporation tax bills are small.
Well, it's outrageous that these companies are moving billions of pounds every year out of the UK and into offshore jurisdictions. And it costs the UK Treasury and the UK taxpayer a vast amount of money. We're estimating it's about £1.5 billion just for 8 companies. And if you put that into context, the IFS say that would fund 40,000 full-time nurses.
Multinational businesses have companies registered all over the world, and they can legally move money between these companies in ways that minimise their tax bills. The UK taxes corporate profits at 19%, but in Ireland, corporation tax is 12.5%, and in Bermuda, it's nothing at all. TaxWatch calculates that Apple avoided paying £516 million in tax in the UK in 2019 by shifting its profits abroad. Google avoided paying £450 million and Microsoft £190 million. Corporate tax avoidance is not just an issue in Britain. Many countries want to change the tax rules, but for years they've struggled to agree the details. On Friday, when the G7 finance ministers meet in London, there may be a breakthrough. The Chancellor will host the meeting here at Lancaster House. On the table is a proposal from the Biden administration for a global minimum rate of corporation tax. But while governments are keen to see multinational companies pay more, they're wary of giving up the freedom to set their own tax rates. This is about securing the tax revenues that governments need, but it's also about protecting smaller businesses who can't use the tax system in the way that multinationals can. Waterstones is in direct competition with Amazon.
When you're competing with a multinational, they can use significant opportunities to minimise the tax burden upon them, which gives them higher profits, which gives them more money to invest, which makes them, frankly, a formidable competitor, but one that is playing with all the odds tilted in their favour.
This weekend, the G7 governments will attempt to agree on how and where the biggest companies should pay tax. The aim is to make the rules fairer, but in the past, different countries have had different ideas of what fair means. There's a lot riding on this. Low tax jurisdictions will be looking on with interest.
And Joel is here. Joel, I mean, the obvious question is, what, if anything, are these governments hoping to achieve in dealing with this huge issue?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? And look, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, eBay, Adobe and Cisco tonight all say they pay the correct amount of tax in all of the countries in which they do business. And they point out entirely reasonably, Rageh, that they do not make the tax rules and they play by them. And it is the rules that are the problem here. And for more than a decade...
Made by politicians.
Made by politicians. And politicians have been trying to work out how do we reform this sensibly. Now, the Biden proposal on the table, this global minimum rate of corporation tax of 15% would work as follows. If a company, a multinational, were to move money into a low tax jurisdiction or a tax haven like Bermuda and were to pay less than 15%, the country where the company is headquartered would be able to impose a penalty tax to make up the difference. In theory, it removes totally the incentive for multinationals to move money around. The problem is that all of the benefit goes to the country where the headquarters is, which in the case of the vast majority of multinationals and almost all of the digital players is
the US.
The United States.
Yeah.
So the Biden administration loves this idea, no wonder. The British government proceeding much more cautiously. The Treasury says tonight, we support an agreement on a global minimum tax to crack down on tax avoidance. But any agreement must ensure digital businesses pay more in tax in the UK to reflect their economic activities. Rishi Sunak wants a greater share of the spoils from Google and co. This is tax. It's technical. It's hugely important too. At some point when the pandemic's over, the government's going to want to raise tax. If it gets it from businesses, it won't need to get it from businesses.
And it impacts on all of us, ultimately. Thank you very much, Joel. Now, after the 15 months we've had, who knows what we'll all be doing next year. But Buckingham Palace is very much hoping people will be celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. 10 years on from her Diamond Jubilee, by 2022, she will have reigned for 70 years. None of her predecessors ever managed that. So there will be a 4-day bank holiday weekend starting exactly a year from now. The main event will be a live concert featuring some of the world's biggest stars, as yet unnamed, in what will be called the Platinum Party at the Palace. And the bit that the Queen herself might enjoy the most, the Epsom Derby, will be rolled into the celebrations. There you go. Now, if parched deserts and melting polar ice caps seem a little distant from some people's lives, the environmental charity, the WWF, is trying to show the effects on things closer to home and in time for the Climate Change Summit in Glasgow in November. The WWF says that if global warming is not halted, some of the UK's favourite spring wildlife will be threatened, like bluebells and bumblebees.
Our summer flowers may be buzzing with them, but Britain's bumblebees are under threat from global warming. In the wildflower meadows on Dungeness Nature Reserve, some of the rarest species can still be found, if, like Dr. Nikki Gammons, you know what you're looking for.
So this is a brown-banded carder queen. So we have 7 very rare species, and this is the 3rd rarest here.
But climate change and hotter summers mean some of our native bumblebees are being driven out.
So bumblebees have very furry bodies, so they're very efficient at cooler temperatures. So in the late 20s, early 30 degrees, it becomes a bit too hot for them. So if we keep seeing temperatures rising, it will mean they can't come out and forage. So again, they will start to retreat further north or to higher altitudes.
And that could mean the loss of vital pollinators.
The threat of climate change isn't just about the impact it has on the bees themselves, it's also about what it does to the environment that they live in.
As global temperatures rise, more droughts mean a shorter season for the flowers they forage on. A report by the WWF warns that warmer, drier springs are also threatening another native, the British bluebell. And while in some places UK puffin colonies, as we reported recently, are making a comeback, rising sea temperatures and frequent storms are causing an overall severe decline. The report says global wildlife populations have fallen by an average of 68% since 1970, and current government plans and pledges would see world temperature rises of 2.4 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. The WWF is calling on world leaders meeting at the COP26 climate talks in Glasgow in November to do more to limit that to 1.5 degrees.
We are absolutely at a critical moment in history. If we don't respond now, we really risk losing huge numbers of species around the world. So to give a sense, although we homed in on 12 species, a recent report suggests up to 1 million species might be at risk of extinction, some within the next few decades.
Without action, we're warned our countryside could lose what we now take for granted. Martha Fairley, News at 10, Dungeness.
Well, to rising temperatures of a different kind now, and the mini heat wave that at last brought warmer weather to the UK peaked today. Unfortunately, temperatures to the west of London reached 28.3 degrees, making today the hottest of the year so far. In parts of Wales, temperatures topped 26 degrees. Tomorrow is expected to be slightly cooler. In any kind of design, one idea can feed off another, but high street clothes chains, including Zara, have been accused of copying the patterns of indigenous Mexican groups without giving anything back in return. Mexico's Ministry of Culture is claiming cultural appropriation of ancestral symbols. For its part, Zara says the designs in question was not intentionally borrowed or influenced by any Mexican craftspeople.
High street fashions come and go, of course, but in the corridors of power in Mexico, a pair of shorts, a top and a maxi dress have made a big impact, and not in a good way. The country's Ministry of Culture has written to the stores which are selling them, including the European high street chain Zara, complaining that they've used patterns and designs which belong to Mexico's indigenous communities.
You would know that this was from San Antonino by the delicate
embroidery.
Experts say it's always easy to tell the exact origin of Mexican designs.
Each community have spent a lot of time developing their own style and identity, which means an awful lot to them. It can't be taken lightly if some company come and take the design away and appropriate it.
Zara says its design for the dress was in no way intentionally borrowed from or influenced by the artistry of communities in Mexico, which it makes clear it has the highest respect for. But for Mexican designers, this is just the latest example of multinationals capitalizing on indigenous designs.
First of all, I'm a designer. Second, I work with artisans since 17 years ago. And you cannot just go copy the piece and then go and ask India or China to make it like thousands of pieces. That's not fair.
In the world of art and design, isn't everything inspired by something else?
Inspiration is the sun, the nature, the sea, the clouds. Inspiration is not that I copy whatever. I mean, that's not inspiration, that's copy.
The Mexican government is said to be taking steps formally to protect the designs of its people in seasons to come. The high street may have to take more care to check where its fashions began. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
England's footballers managed to win their first game in front of a home crowd for 18 months. They beat Austria 1-0 in Middlesbrough in a friendly ahead of the Euros. 19-year-old Bukayo Saka got the goal, his first for his country in what was a pretty hard-fought game for a friendly. It ended with star right-back Trent Alexander-Arnold limping off. Wales lost their friendly against France 3-0 in Nice. This from Griezmann, the best of the three. A controversial red card for Nico Williams meant they played for more than an hour with only 10 men. And Scotland were ahead twice in their match against the Netherlands. Kevin Nisbet got their second in a creditable 2-2 draw when several of their main players were out injured. Finally, don't judge a book by its cover, or so the saying goes. Similarly, perhaps don't judge a young person by their obsession with TikTok. So I've been told in my household. That's because the social media phenomenon is actually encouraging them to buy books. Bookshops and publishers are getting wise to the trend, known, not surprisingly, guess what? BookTok.
This is a book review, TikTok style, where book lovers make short, fast-paced videos, using music, sound effects and photos to bring literary works alive.
Hello there.
This is me finishing it! Even filming themselves sobbing after an emotionally crushing ending. And they're having a monumental influence on book sales. Sisters Murray and Elodie from Hove are among those leading the pack.
Squirt! So give me some fin.
We've reached 280,000 followers, which I can't even comprehend. It's crazy. Our most popular posts have reached 6 million.
If you don't know me already, such is their influence, even posting the cover of a book can send it flying off the shelves.
I guess we're just making books more appealing to them, because at school the teachers do the complete opposite of that, I think.
I've taken it as a task to visualise books, because you see them in the paper, it's not really anything you want to put your time and effort in. It looks like school. So showing people on TikTok what books are through photos, imagery and music is really catchy.
The video they created for this book, We Were Liars, has been viewed more than 5 million times and generated a boom in sales.
One of my kids forwarded me a TikTok video and said, "You seem to be popular on TikTok." And I was quite surprised. A month later, I was back on the New York Times bestseller list.
And how did that feel?
Great. Fantastic. They have far surpassed when it was on the bestseller list in 2014, and they have stayed booming since last June.
And it surprised these TikTok stars too, who are making books cool for kids. Sejal Karia, News at 10.
There you go. BookTok is upon us. And that is all for news at 10 tonight. But don't forget the Peston programme, which follows the news where you are. But from me and the rest of the team, a very good night.